Little St. George Island sits 8 miles off the coast of Florida in the Gulf of Mexico. This part of the Panhandle is known as Florida's Forgotten Coast. But once you dive into the island's history, it is truly unforgettable. Welcome to Green Ridge Outdoor Adventures. Thanks again for watching. In this video, we are on Little St. George Island in the Apalachicola Bay. In the first video, we paddled about 9 miles from St. George Island and spent our first 3 nights at the Government Dock primitive campsites in the middle of the island. I was up early that morning, despite the long paddle the day before. Josh decided to try his luck at fishing on Government Dock, and I flew the drone. That day we decided to explore the island and hike first to the Marshall House. The short hike along the Government Dock Trail to the Marshall House was less than a half a mile. But before we got there, we had to walk by Gator Pond. I'm gonna record just in case.
Either an alligator or the way it flashed, it had to be an alligator.
It might be turtle, but I think you're right. After you pass Gator Pond, you pass some of the outer buildings associated with the Marshall House. The Marshall House was originally built by Herbert Marshall in 1945. Marshall's wife, Pearl Porter, was the daughter of former Little St. George Lighthouse keeper Edward Gibbs Porter. In the 1880s, Porter bought all of the island except for 6 acres. Those 6 acres were owned by the U.S. Lighthouse establishment where the lighthouse and 2 dwellings stood. In 1923, Herbert and Pearl were married and moved to the island to live in the former lighthouse keeper's house. But when the Apalachicola Army Field closed in 1945, they purchased 2 Army barracks and had them shipped to the island. The Coast Guard then assumed operation of the lighthouse and notified the Marshalls they would raise the original keeper's dwelling. The Marshalls claimed the right to the keeper's dwelling's building materials and used its doors and pine floors and combined the 2 Army barracks to form the Marshall House as you see it today. The Marshall House now serves as a field station for the Apalachicola National Estuarine Research Staff. Just down from the Marshall House is Marshall Dock and what appears to be a boathouse. Man, this is crazy. Leaving the Marshall House, we hiked on Short Road for about a quarter of a mile and came to Island Ridge Trail. At the half-mile mark, we came to Old Bay Road. Island Ridge Trail and Old Bay Road both run northwest and end overlooking the bay. After passing Old Bay Road, we came across some brick ruins that appeared to be from the island's Turpentine history. From 1910 to 1916, and again in the 1950s, pine trees on the island were cat-faced in order to make turpentine. Slashes were made on the trees that resembled cat whiskers to collect the pine tree resin. Containers called hurdy cups were hung on the trees to collect the resin, and then the resin was distilled to make turpentine. From these brick ruins, we walked a couple hundred feet, passing Lighthouse Road, and then we made it to the beach. From the Marshall House, Short Road is about 3/4 of a mile to the beach. Little St. George Island's Gulf side is one of the most remote beaches we've been to and is covered with millions of shells. We decided to walk to the primitive camping platform on the beach, but after a couple thousand feet, the beach ended and we were forced to walk through the brush. This camping platform is part of the Florida Circumnavigational Saltwater paddling trail, but it seemed to be in pretty bad shape. This platform is very close to the site of the last lighthouse that stood on Little St. George Island. The island's first lighthouse was built in 1833 to help ships find Apalachicola, but this first lighthouse was torn down and its materials were used to build a new lighthouse, which was lit in 1848. Unfortunately, it did not survive 3 years because a storm flattened it in 1851. A new contract was awarded to rebuild it that same year, and it was approximately 250 yards inland from the previous site. The lighthouse then survived the Civil War, and after 100 years, the light was automated in 1949, leaving the keeper's dwelling vacant. But by the early 1990s, beach erosion had taken its toll on the lighthouse. In 1992, Hurricane Andrew removed most of the sand between the lighthouse and the water. The light was deactivated in 1994, and then Hurricane Opal hit the area in 1995. This massive storm resulted in a tidal surge around the lighthouse, forcing it off its piling foundation. And Opal also damaged the oil house and the keeper's dwelling. In 1999, the Cape St. George Lighthouse Society was formed, and they raised over $250,000 in an attempt to save the lighthouse. Holes were drilled in the lighthouse's 4-foot thick walls, so a 10-foot tall base of cement could be poured to provide a stable foundation. Still standing in shallow water, the cement base would eventually succumb to the constant waves. In October 2005, the stress from the leaning tower was just too much, and the lighthouse was found toppled in the water. In October 2007, ground was broken on St. George Island for a new lighthouse using drawings of the old tower. These ruins still lay on the beach in the exact same spot as the former keeper dwelling and oil house. As the water and sand flow in and around them, they signify a history that will not be forgotten. We left the ruins and primitive camping shelter and found Lighthouse Road despite the end of it being washed away by the ocean. We followed it back towards Short Road and then back to our camp at Government Dock. To end the night, I flew the drone one last time and Josh got the fire started. To see our next day at Government Dock and our paddle back to Sykes Cut, please click on the link above.